For the last 20 years, the US foreign policymakers have been obsessed with the Middle East and specifically democracy in the Middle East, whether post 9/11 or post the Arab Spring. George W. Bush and Barack Obama claimed to be all about advancing democracy and free elections. And as Obama once said, supporting strong and accountable institutions. We know a lot of that rhetoric was just rhetoric. It was lip service because the United States, then and now, continues to support brutal dictatorships and absolute monarchies across that very same region. Donald Trump, for his part, kind of exposed that hypocrisy by pretty much embracing what we all knew to be the case already. Rather than talking the talk about democracy, he danced the Saudis' sword dance and called Egypt's General Sisi his favorite dictator. Now, with Joe Biden in office, we have been hearing about democracy, yes, but it's clear Biden's rhetoric on preserving and protecting this form of government is largely being directed inward rather than abroad. You may remember this from August. Biden said at a fundraising event, what we're seeing now is the beginning or the death knell of an extreme MAGA philosophy. It's not just Trump, it's the entire philosophy that underpins I'm going to say something, it's like semi-fascism. So when it comes to fighting for democracy at home, are there lessons the US can learn from its own efforts and missteps in the Middle East? What are we in America to do when democracy produces undesirable outcomes? Not just in Middle East countries where we worry about the rise of quote-unquote Islamists, but here at home where we worry about the rise of neo-fascists. A new book taking on that subject argues that there is no obvious answer. The Problem of Democracy, America, the Middle East, and the Rise and Fall of an Idea, out this month, is written by senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and research professor of Islamic Studies, Shadi Hamid. He argues that one of the hallmarks of democracy is not being happy about the result of an election, but accepting that result nevertheless. And that, quote, according to this metric, today the United States no longer meets this prerequisite of democracy. But Shadi Hamid also doesn't like critics calling Trump or the GOP fascists, worries about liberals accepting the results of elections, and has also said we are witnessing a high point for democracy right now. Confused? Let's talk to Shadi Hamid. He's the author of The Problem of Democracy, senior fellow at Brookings and contributing writer at The Atlantic. Shadi, thanks so much for coming on the show. Your book looks at democracy in the Middle East primarily. What is the state of democracy and democratic movements in the Middle East right now, almost 20 years on from the invasion of Iraq, more than 10 years on from the start of the Arab Spring?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Mehdi. So the short answer is that it's pretty bad. After the euphoria of the Arab Spring, a lot of us were optimistic, and then it took a dark turn. And one of the main reasons, as I argue in my book, is people saw democratic outcomes that they weren't happy with. They saw those outcomes as a threat to their own existence. And then things started to crumble. And here I'm referring to the rise of religiously oriented parties who won in democratic elections in countries like Egypt and Tunisia. And then there was a military coup in Egypt and democratic backsliding or return to full-on dictatorship across the region after that initial optimism. And I think part of the issue there, and something that we as Americans can learn from, is politics came to be so existential in these countries because people were debating the role of religion in public life, culture, identity. These issues are hard to compromise on because it's how do you split the middle on religion? But if you're doing economics or tax rates, at least you have numbers that are tangible.
One of the topics you bring up, and one of the ways you want to deal with this, is democratic minimalism, the idea that we should be privileging democracy, democratic outcomes over abstract liberalism, over personal freedoms or social progress. Briefly break down that idea for us. And does it apply across the world or just in the Middle East where you have people in dictatorships trying to transition to democracy?
Yeah, so this idea of democratic minimalism that I lay out in the book, it's about lowering our ambitions a little bit to not see democracy as this panacea that will lead to other good things, because sometimes democracy doesn't lead to other good things. Sometimes citizens are extremely unhappy with the results. And that's precisely what happened throughout the Middle East, that secular elites saw the rise of these religious parties and they said, well, if that's what democracy entails, count us out. But also, as you said in your intro, Mehdi, the U.S. was also uncomfortable with democratic outcomes in the Middle East during the Arab Spring, because we as Americans, we tend to think that if people vote, they'll vote the right way and people will be moderate, nice and fluffy. And that's not always the way it works. So I think that has relevance increasingly in a way that I didn't expect during the Arab Spring. I came back to the U.S. In the lead up to the Trump era, and then I saw that we were dealing with some of these same dilemmas.
So,
because if democracy is good, how does it lead to someone like Donald Trump? And that's something I think
so let's
we
talk
have
about
to
that.
think. Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because Shadi, you get into a lot of Twitter spats. I think you and I have had our fair share of arguments online as well. Some people see you as being a contrarian for contrarian's sake. For example, most liberals, most experts on democracy, most voting rights activists are very worried about the current state and future of American democracy. But then you tweet last week, I see this moment as a high point for democracy. It can seem ugly and certainly inelegant, but I do believe we are witnessing the resilience of the democratic idea. Shadi, what part of the ongoing attack on voting rights, voter suppression, racist gerrymandering, harassment of and death threats against election workers, intimidation of voters at drop boxes in Arizona just this past weekend, hundreds of GOP election deniers running for office next month, the former president planning already on challenging the results of both the 2022 and 2024 elections? What part of any of that tells you this is a high point for democracy?
So, yeah, Mehdi, it seems like you might get me in trouble with that tweet that you just put up, which a lot of people took issue with, understandably. What I'm talking about there is, if you look at the UK, Liz Truss is pushed out after 44 days. It seems chaotic, but it's also vibrant. There is a vigorous debate in Britain, also in our country here in the US, in a country like Italy, where a far-right party did extremely well in the recent elections, and there might even be a far-right prime minister in Italy. We can look at that and say the sky is falling, but I think there's another way to look at it and say that voters are engaging. There's high turnout, and if voters aren't happy with who's in charge, they're going to consider other potentially radical options. But this is part of the democratic process. We can't have any full guarantee where we say we'll have elections, but there's no way that the bad party or the far right party will win. There's just no way to be certain about that. Democracy is about uncertainty, and that's why it can be frightening. Yes, are there flaws? Are there flaws in our democracy? I'm concerned about voter suppression. I'm concerned about Republican Party officials buying into the big lie, talking about disregarding results or decertifying results on the local and state level. We have to be vigilant about that. But I also worry that, at the same time, these are Republicans or Trump supporters. We have to find a way to live with them. So there's a kind of middle ground that we have to look for. We have to be concerned, but we shouldn't pretend that America is an authoritarian regime. It's not.
So I'll come back to authoritarianism in a moment. I would take issue with your point about the UK, because they're about to have a third prime minister this year, the second without an election. So I'm not sure the whole elections high turnout works with the UK. A lot of British people are very unhappy to have another unelected prime minister foisted on them. But I want to take you back. I want to take you back to the weekend of September the 12th, September the 13th, 2020, 2 months before the presidential election. That Saturday, Trump does a rally saying the election will be rigged, he says, and that he plans to negotiate a third term for himself in power. That weekend, it's reported that Trump ally Roger Stone is advising the president to bring in martial law and lock up the Clintons. And that same weekend, you publish a piece in The Atlantic headlined, "The Democrats May Not Be Able to Concede." The Democrats, in which you write, "As someone who has argued against catastrophism, I don't believe Donald Trump is a fascist or a dictator in the making, and I don't believe America is a failed state. I find myself truly worried about only one scenario, that Trump will win re-election and Democrats and others on the left will be unwilling, even unable to accept the result." Shadi, in your desire to be anti-catastrophic, you got the 2020 election and the very real threat to democracy very wrong, didn't you?
Yeah, so, Mehdi, I'm open about the fact that I underestimated how bad some Republicans would be. And, but I think the main thrust of that article, I actually stand by it in the sense that I want to counsel my fellow liberals and Democrats that if there is, God forbid, an outcome where Trump or someone like him wins in 2024, I do worry about how liberals and Democrats will react to that. Will they come to terms if Trump wins fair and square and it's a clear result? Um, do we find a way to live with that reality, or do you see a loss of faith in the democratic process where a growing number of Americans on our side of the spectrum say, if this is what democracy produces, not just once, because sometimes there's a fluke,
I guess,
but if Trump wins twice, then that's going to really be a test to see about people's commitment to the democratic idea. And I, as a liberal, I tend to talk to my own side because I don't have much influence with MAGA Republicans. So when I am speaking to liberal audiences,
but Shadi, let me jump in here. Let me jump in here. First of all, whether Trump wins again and whether that's an outcome of democracy is in fact the question itself. I would question your premise because the whole point is, will he win fair and square given all of the laws they're changing at the state level, all of the suppression that's going on? That's one point. On the other point about talking to liberals, my worry is that it's not just you saying, let's have a discussion about what we do. It is a complacency. So people like myself are often called alarmists for saying, we're in trouble, we're in trouble. But then I look at someone like yourself, and it's not just that one piece in September 2020. It's the morning of January 6, 2021. You tweeted, as of today, we're going to have a peaceful transfer of power. I shouldn't have to say that because there was never any real doubt, despite claims to the contrary. The system worked. Now, that was such a badly timed take that you have since deleted that tweet. But I wonder, Shadi, I promise I'm not trying to dunk on you. I'm genuinely asking, have you reflected on what you got wrong and reevaluated your views? Because I worry that nearly 2 years later, you're still saying, don't be catastrophic. Let's calm down. Democracy's fine, even though it wasn't fine and you were wrong last time around.
Yeah, so look, I put out thousands of tweets, and have I been right on every single tweet? Of course not. So I think it's easy to look back and say, yeah, there are some tweets that haven't looked very good in retrospect. Unlike a lot of other people on Twitter, I guess I'm not always right. Sometimes I make mistakes, and I'm willing to kind of be self-critical about that.
And I appreciate that. I'm asking, have you learned from those mistakes?
Yeah. So, well, look, I mean, first of all, I tweeted that before January 6th. Very few people predicted that there would be an insurrection in the Capitol. So that was an unlikely thing. That was a surprise and a shock to a lot of Americans, understandably so. I am very concerned about Trump and people who are wedded to Trump because they aren't committed to respecting democratic outcomes. There's a lot of blame to go around. Now Republicans are worse on this, obviously. The tens of millions of Republicans who don't believe that Biden actually won. And I would like
you say, Shadi, you say you're worried about Trump. But you're also someone who has very firmly dismissed the idea of a fascist movement in the United States or that Trump has fascist tendencies. And I just want to, before we run out of time, I just want to try and pin you down on this a bit, because before the election, you wrote a piece saying Americans are losing sight of what fascism means. And more recently, you said you were fed up of the fascism debate, especially in the wake of Joe Biden's remarks. At what point would you be willing to say America does have a fascism problem? Or is your position that unless we're living in Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler in the 1930s, we never have to worry about fascism?
Well, here's the problem, Mehdi. I don't want to demonize tens of millions of Republicans. And that, I think there's a danger when
I'm not
Biden
asking you to. I'm asking you to comment on Trump and Trumpism, not the voters.
Yeah, but MAGA, if we're talking about MAGA Republicans, many, if not most Republicans are still sympathetic of Trump. So if we go down the route of saying that these people are fascists or semi-fascists.
But nobody's saying that. Joe Biden didn't say that. Hold on. Nobody's saying that. I know that's your defense. Deal with the phenomenon. Trump and Trumpism, the philosophy. Is it fascistic? Are you not worried about its fascistic authoritarian tendencies?
But something can be authoritarian, something can be bad and dangerous without us obsessing over the fascist label. I don't like the fascist label because it's a way, what do Americans think about? They think about Nazi Germany or Mussolini in Italy. And I think that has a distorting effect on our political debate where we're trying to compare something to 1930s Germany. Our context obviously is quite different. So let's say that Trump is bad. And let's be straight up about that without using language that potentially puts supporters of Trump or MAGA or the MAGA philosophy into a deplorable basket. We've done this time and time again where we demonize other Americans and say, oh, they're bad, they're deplorable, they shouldn't even be voting. We wish they didn't vote. Where does that take us? That's unsustainable.
I'm not disputing your point that demonizing people doesn't help, but I do think we should also be able to call things what they are. You're an academic, you're a policy guy, you've written a book. If something sounds like fascism, walks like fascism, we shouldn't be afraid to use that label. Robert Paxton, who, as you know, is America's preeminent academic expert on European fascism, he wrote in Newsweek after January 6th, I resisted for a long time applying the fascist label to Donald Trump, but Trump's incitement of the invasion of the Capitol on January 6, 2020, removes my objection to the fascist label. If even Paxton can change his mind based on events like 1/6, why can't you? Or is it because you like being contrarian?
No, okay, but Mehdi, why are you so focused on using this word fascist? What does it actually give you that we?
Because I think we should be able to identify the threat.
Okay, but well, I mean, we can identify an authoritarian threat. I just don't see. Yeah, so look, fascism, people can debate about definitions. We don't have to get into an academic debate about that. I see the danger signs of moving in that direction, in part because of my experiences in the Middle East, when words like fascism and authoritarian, totalitarian were used very liberally against religious right-wing parties. So I just don't want to, I've seen what happens when we start to view politics as a battle between good and evil, when we see our opponents not as opponents, but as enemies to be defeated. We have to learn to live with the 74 million Trump voters. I want to move us closer in that direction. And I worry that others, not to say you, Mehdi, but others may not be as willing to do that.
I mean, Shadi, I agree with what you just said. We can't see politics as something where we have to defeat the others or see the others as evil, and we have to be able to live with people who vote differently to us. But that message should really be going to the Republican Party.